guys, and welcome back to another episode of the ADHDads. I'm your host, CJ.
I'm JJ.
And today we have a very special guest coming on. We have John Kovaleski. He's the creator of the comic strip Daddy Daze. And that details John's experiences as a new father and what that's like and all the trials, tribulations, rewards, and struggles and hurdles that come along with that. So it's got a very lighthearted feel to it and message. And I've been a fan since I kind of started reading it and really wanted to pick John's brain today because, you know, this podcast here started through the Blend Dad family effort, which is when I first came into this family as a stepdad, and I was writing articles and more like journal entries, really personal stuff about what I was going through and what I was trying to navigate. And I accompanied those with some cartoons and some drawings and stuff like that. And that's kind of where this whole thing got started and morphed and evolved into this podcast that you're hearing now with JJ. So I was just really excited to talk to John and see what that journey has been like for him and you know, where he finds his inspiration. So John, man, say hi to our guest and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hello, everybody. I am a cartoonist and a teacher. Right now, this is actually my second syndicated comic strip. It's called Daddy Daze, and that is actually Daze. That's a little terrible pun. And it does indeed very loosely based on myself.
Dad puns.
Yes. Very loosely based on myself and my son when my son was an infant. And the one of the premises of the strip is that as an infant, the character that's the baby, that's named Angus. I can talk a little bit about how I got names for the characters in the strip. Talks only in the word ba, and his father, and actually everybody who is family in the strip, which includes his mom and his grandparents on the phone, can understand him. So part of it is that character, loosely based on me, talks about or translates what the kid is saying. So there's a little bit of a communication trickiness there, but it lends itself in the same way to, you know, everything from Woodstock's scratches in Peanuts to Lassie barking and everyone around him going, you know, Timmy's stuck in a well, or R2-D2 beeping and you know what he says. It's that kind of trope. So it adds a little bit of interesting.
Guardians of the Galaxy today.
Sure, yeah, completely. You know, it's something that's been used over and over again, and in a sort of joking, hilarious way. So he talks like that. I both translate and you know, as I. So here's one problem that I'll tell you about is that sometimes I will just call the character me or I. Because when I'm talking about him, the only time I'm talking about the strip really to another human being is usually to my son. My son is now a preteen. He is no longer an infant. And I talk to him. He reads the gags. He is very funny as well. And so when he was younger and I would talk to him about it, I would say, okay, so the dad says this and the baby's, and he says, Daddy, just say you and me. So I will oftentimes refer to the dad character as me. Although now my son in the last, maybe he's been doing it 2 years, maybe he's even as close as 3 years, has been doing the art for the drop panels. Drop panels are on a Sunday strip. When you see, depending on how a newspaper lays it out, they may need a little bit of extra something on the left-hand side. So sometimes you'll see a panel there that's a throwaway panel that has the logo for the comic strip in it and some art. So that usually has to do with the gag in that strip. So what I'll do with my son, it took a little bit of convincing because sometimes he would give me ideas, and he drew one out one time on a Post-it, and I actually used it, and he was like, Daddy, no, I don't want to do that. And so it took a little bit, and it was actually at his suggestion. So he now does the art for that. And And so when we talk back and forth,
so
I'll
cool.
either read him the gag if I'm not done yet with it, or I will, I'll have him read it, and then we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about it back and forth. So usually, it's funny because we end up referring to the dad as me, even though he has a different name. His name is Paul in the strip. But we'll talk about the baby as not being necessarily my son when we're talking about it in this way. We'll call him Angus, which is the name of the baby. So that's one of the weird things is that I'll try not to refer to the character as me. It sounds both pretentious and like I'm unstable, which is one of the funny things that I will get comments online sometimes that, and believe me, I've thought of this before, that it's not so much a strip about a single dad and his infant son. It is about a dad slowly going insane because he is translating what his son says, but his son is just blithering. My son actually did, when he was about 6 months old, say the word ba. All kids make noises. All kids think they are communicating. But he really thought he was talking. We have video of him just going, ba, 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 ba. And it was hilarious. And when I, started developing the strip for syndication, I took that as something like, oh, okay, I can use this and have it be a little bit of an extra thing because, he is one of those characters, which tends to be any kid sometime in a strip who is smarter than any infant, smarter than, sometimes adults. Although not all the time. Asks a lot of questions, which I think is a key thing that comes with parenting. We spend a lot of time, answering questions of our kids. And a lot of times, a lot of what goes on in the strip is sort of question and answer based. And even if it's outlandish, that's I try to. I mean, it is slightly based in reality.
Well, that's what I really love about that comic strip too. Is the dynamic between Angus and the dad, and how all he is saying "Bob," but the dad is asking questions and answering his own questions in a lot of those strips. So, like you said, it's like this kind of journey as you watch this father, excuse me, as you're saying, go insane, but. What I look at it is this beautiful way is the father is finding himself in these comics just through this simple just presence of this kid. And it's really resonated with me, John, because I have this memory that I've kind of been dying to tell on this podcast, but I've been waiting for you to come on because I feel it resonates so much. Resonates with hold on, we have to pause here because I have this post-it note right above my desk here that says resonate, because for the last 23 podcasts I have been saying resognate.
Okay.
And my wife, every time I'm done recording this podcast, she goes, "Baby, you did it again. It's resonate. Why do you keep putting a G in there? You always add consonants that don't belong in words." So I am trying to be better about my pronunciation.
I have this post-it that says, "Don't try not to say and so much."
So, anyways, let me backtrack. Your comic strip really resonates with me because I have this moment. It was right as our youngest turned 2 years old, and he was, to me, in my mind at the moment, for the last 3 weeks during this season, I was using this term, terrible twos. He's going through terrible twos. I don't know. He's just not. I can't understand all the things that I was using before to get through the day. These routines that we had put into place were no longer working. where I could sit him down and he would play with his cars or his toys in the corner while I got a workout in. And then we would go on a walk. None of those things were working anymore. He didn't have the attention span to sit in the corner. He was always wanting, attention and making noise and crying and having big emotions, and didn't want to go on the walks anymore. He wanted to get out of the stroller and start walking around now. He started to, get mobile, and just all of these routines that we had spent the last year putting in place ever since I decided to be a stay-at-home father with him started to not work. And I was kind of going crazy. Like, what is up with this? How do I do this? And some of the dad chats that JJ and I are a part of, someone said it's not terrible twos. He's found a voice. He's now, all the old ways of communicating aren't working anymore. And he's developed all these new ways of moving around and vocalizing and making these noises. And, he's trying to communicate with you. He's trying to get present with you. And it was like a slap in the face. I was like, well, shoot, duh. And it was a few days after that, we were having a morning, and everybody had left for school, and it was just me and the little guy, and I was in the kitchen trying to clean and get stuff ready for the day, and he was making a big noise, a big to-do, and I couldn't figure out what he was wanting, but he was having big emotions about it, and I was just, Caden, come on, I'm trying to do this, I got the dishes to wash, and this and this and this, and all of a sudden, that conversation that I had previous days hit me like a brick in the head. And all of a sudden, it was like I tuned in and I could hear my son and what he was saying. And he said, Dada, I want car. It's up. And he kept going over to our little Alexa that has a camera, and he said, car here. And he was trying to get me to look on the camera to see that the car that he wanted to play with was up in the girls' room, that he wanted. And I was just trying to be dismissive of him to get through my, chore list through the day. And it was the first moment that I said, holy shit, my son's talking. Not only is he talking, he's putting together full sentences. And I've been so preoccupied with the me and the ego of what's going on in this body that I have been missing this 3 weeks worth of like talking and wanting to verbalize with me and communicate with me. And it was just this eye-opening moment where I collapsed on the floor with him. I hugged him. I cried these tears of gratitude and joy, like, oh my God, you silly Pollock, like, how did you miss this? It was right there. It's been right here. And ever since then, it's like I speak Caden, man. Like I'm fluent in toddler language, and I can hear words and pronunciations that nobody else, not even my wife, can understand in him. So when I see that dynamic in your comic between Angus and the dad, it warms my heart and gives me that moment and that memory that I have with my own son, and how we just need to just be present. And there's so much communication, even in these young ages, and so many lessons that can be learned from just being present, even if there aren't words to make that connection.
True. Well, thanks for saying that. I mean, I think too, one of the things with how I relate to my kid is that for most of his life, myself and his mom have been co-parents, and we what that tends to mean is, because we're he's either spending time in my house or at her house, we're and I can't speak for her, but I think we're both we're more focused in the time that we're spending with him. We only have one kid, so that makes it a little bit easier. And because those times tend to be a little bit more, binary. He's either there or he's not there. With most families, your kid is there, and you're, certainly it's part of the fabric of your life in terms of what you're doing. You're trying to do this, you're trying to do that. But mostly for me, it's usually I'm there with my kid, and I'm a little bit more focused on him, even when we've got to do something else. Got to go grocery shopping, or, dinner needs to be made. But it's a little bit more focused. And even, he'll come up, I'll have him come up to my studio and just hang out with me. Or if he's got something else, he needs to do, I'll be like, come on upstairs. and hang out with me because I got to do work. So it's been helpful to think about spending that kind of specific focus time with my son.
I love to hear that you incorporate him and that he participates in the illustrations of that. I just think that's so rad and essential, and again, really goes back to the core message that I get of the comic strip, which is the presence and intentionality. And I've recently started writing a kid's book idea with my oldest too, or with all of my kids really. And we've been working on that for like the last 3 months here, sitting in front of the computer, and she's been learning the ins and outs of Photoshop and stuff like that. So it's been a really cool experience. And it started out of a really kind of frustrating moment again. I think that's like my journey in parenthood, is that I encounter these really like frustrating, like, I gotta get through this just to do this thing. But then the lesson that I always keep coming back to and learning over and over again is, well, let's just slow down and incorporate and be present here. And there's a really great thing that we can do together here. Just like the last story that I told you of listening to my son. And when I had this idea and I was sitting in front of the computer, our oldest came over and wanted to get involved. What are you doing? This looks fun. You're coloring, you're drawing. I want to engage in this, and I at first kind of had this mindset of, I'm trying to just do it. I gotta get it done. And then I said, well, hold on, this is kind of taken away from why I'm doing this in the first place,
Sure.
Let's do this together. So though maybe the quality of the illustrations may have degraded a little bit throughout the process, it's also like really forged a great connection and some really great memories, that then when we do publish this thing, she's going to be the illustrator on the front cover,
Oh, yeah.
Like, she did this, and we're doing this together. So it's this really sense of pride that I'm getting, not through what the finished product will look like, but through the process that we are able to engage in together.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, so it is one of the
curious, like, yeah, I'm curious, what does that look like now for you and your son, and how did you get him involved? Was that something that he kind of got his own curiosity for and wanted to do along with you? Or is that something that, you guys, that you kind of brought him in on? Or what did that look like? And how do you get the content now that he's older and you're still writing about this little toddler?
Right. Well, with in terms of getting him involved with doing the art for the Sunday strips, it really was, my suggestion first. He really didn't want to do it, and he was younger. And then after a couple of years, he kind of asked if he could do it, and we kind of worked on it in that way. I actually, when I have enough time, I have him do the Photoshop coloring for it. Oftentimes, I don't because I'm super behind. He was actually he just left for camp for a couple of weeks. And so one of the Sunday strips I had written, didn't have it drawn. So he did the art for that, just before I left practically. In terms of the writing of it, the writing of it is all me, more or less. There are times when I will ask him, because he's a funny kid. I'll ask him something. So I just finished a bunch of strips that I wrote where, and I have sort of different, I don't know, ideas or sort of concepts that roll around with the strip. One that I mentioned is the asking of questions, which is practically all of parenting is kids asking you questions. And I can twist that to be a little bit funny, a little bit outlandish. I just, did it run? I don't think it's run yet. It might be running this week. I have a thing about Angus asking the dad if he ever had detention when he was in school. A question a kid might ask. And I actually used something that happened to me when I was in junior high, where I don't think I got caught at this, actually, where we were just shooting rubber bands in the study hall type of thing. And I used that. And then at the end, Angus asks his dad, is detention like spending a nickel in the slammer? You know, is it like being in prison? So that's the joke there. And then the next day's one is him asking again, and the dad saying, no, detention is not like spending a nickel in the slammer. And then there's kind of a pause, and then Angus goes ba ba ba, and he goes, I have no prison tats. So those kind of sort of outlandish answers or questions that can be asked, just kind of twisting it a bit. So in terms of like having my son help me out, I had a whole series, maybe a week-long thing where Angus is asking, basically he wants to buy a car. And we're going through a lot of the different possibilities. So a kid will oftentimes ask, can I do this? And you might say no, you're too old, you're not old enough, blah, blah, blah. And then the kid will ask it in a slightly different way or a slightly changed subject to it. Not necessarily trying to do a workaround. Sometimes it's just curiosity. So much of this was Angus asking if he could, buy a car. And then the answer was no. And then it was, can I buy a golf cart? No. Can I buy a riding lawnmower? And those kind of things. So I did ask my son, set up the thing. I go, I need some things that would be funny. And so he did come up with golf cart, which I used as kind of a setup. But he also came up with, what if it was a 747 with no wings and all you could do is drive it around the runway? And so I actually used that. So he can be helpful in that way. But mostly it's me sort of sitting down. I try to write every day, and I'll just say I try. I keep a very poor schedule in terms of being super organized. I know a lot of cartoonists who are very much so, sit down and do, and I'm bad at that. I do the work when certainly it needs to be done, and it always needs to be done. It is a daily comic strip, runs 365 days a year. And as I say, the monster always needs to be fed. You cannot not feed it. So I try to spend some time every day writing. And sometimes what that'll be will be me opening up, I tend to be a very paper and pencil type of person doing my work. But with this, I will make notes in my notes app on my phone. And sometimes it'll be a bit of a stream of consciousness of writing down something and then basically a lot of times writing, another cartoonist friend of mine called it this. It's sort of like organized organized daydreaming, where you think of an idea and you go, okay, where can this go? And so I'll just kind of type out little things, usually bits of dialogue back and forth. And, if it doesn't necessarily come up with a gag, that's fine. I have a huge long file of notes that I'm constantly going back to and digging through. And I'm sure there's stuff from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago at the very beginning of that I haven't used, that I'll sometimes dig down and go, okay, what was this? Can I use this small idea and kind of build it into something else? So I don't necessarily use my son for direct inspiration. It is mostly a situation of two characters that I'm trying to think of how they would relate to something funny that comes up. Although, when I first started doing the comic strip, I was in grad school. I was in grad school when my son was born. I was going to a low residency college for my MFA in order to continue teaching. But one of the things I did there, and they were, it was a great college, but it is super earthy, crunchy. So whatever you were exploring in terms of art, as long as you were being rigorous in it, they were fine with it. So I went in thinking I would mostly do sort of graphic novel work. Ended up doing abstract expressionist painting, which I still do, doing a lot of different sort of explorations, some video stuff, some found object sculpture that had to do with photography. And one of the things I did during that time, because I had done a comic strip for a little over 4 years. Once again, terrible pun, called Bo Nanas. Name of the main character, who is a talking monkey in the real world. And it was not successful. I kept going. I kept doing it for much longer than I should have. And one of the things I was really struggling with was the process of doing the comic strip. I thought maybe, even though in terms of cartooning, I've done a lot of illustration and stuff like that, but in terms of cartooning, I always wanted to have a comic strip, and it really felt like, okay, maybe this is not the thing for me. Maybe this is not going to work out. And I was really struggling with the process of drawing a comic strip, how much time it takes versus how much time it takes to write, stuff like that there. So one of the things, and that was one of the explorations I did in my MFA, but one of the ongoing projects I decided to do was a weekly comic strip that I just put put online, just basically for myself, more or less. And it was myself and my son and his mom and the experiences of the first year. And I made it completely autobiographical, including the gags, including the punchlines. They were things that actually happened. Here's one that I cannot use in regular old, you even though I'm doing a strip about a baby, kind of want to hold back on diaper humor as much as possible. But one of the things that happened completely was that, I was changing our son. He was just a baby, and it was a projectile poop. Only happened once, never saw anything like it again. It shot out of him 5 feet out of this little baby. And I yelled for his mom to come help. And, that was I'm trying to remember what the exact gag is, but it might be us discussing like how far it went. Because we did discuss this. We had definite disagreements about how far it went. Another one, just for fun, also has to do with changing. A little boy, you tend to have, if you're changing them, you can, they'll pee everywhere. My son was not like that, amazingly enough. And so I was not in the habit of covering him when he was, when I was changing him. So one time he just peed like he does. And, I put my hand underneath, and then I put both hands underneath. It doesn't help. And what I said was, when catching pee, 2 hands is just about as good as one, because it's completely useless. So that was the kind of stuff I did. And I did it for a year. So all of that was certainly inspiration for the strip, but it wasn't until years later where I was looking for new cartooning projects and really looked at it and went, okay, I could do this, fictionalize it. My son was already over a toddler, he was just a grade school kid. And using the idea of using Ba in it was kind of like, oh, okay. This can be a little bit of an extra twist in terms of the usual, parent to kid relationship. So that's, I do get inspiration from our relationship in a general way, but not so much specifically in terms of actual gags.
Yeah. When you started this, why this and why this character, and why did you go that route? You said you had done something with your wife, and there was a little bit more personal, but was there some moment in that process that was like an aha of this is the direction that you wanted to go with Daddy Daze, or why did you land there and decide to move in that direction?
Well, I think when I was looking for some new cartooning projects, and specifically I was reaching out for syndication again. I had dusted off some old ideas. I worked up some newer ones, and this ended up being just one of the ones when you get right down to it. It was special to me, but I didn't know if it would be special to anybody else. It was interesting that, and it never happens like this, I wrote maybe about a dozen gags in rapid succession. And I was kind of amazed that I did. And I drew those up, and that was what I sent out to the syndicates at that time. At that time, I mean, there's a syndicate is basically your agent. They go out and they sell it to the newspapers. They handle all the distribution and stuff like that. They're also your editors, which you certainly need. And I having been around the biz for a while, I knew everybody at the different syndicates, so sending those out was not a big deal. And basically, the ones I sent out to, they said no. They liked it, but they said no. And one of the ones actually has runs the website gocomics.com, and the reruns for my comic strip Bananas have been on there for years. And they said, well, we've got another strip, whatever, with a baby. How about we could run it on Go Comics? And I was like, okay. And I knew I wasn't going to make a lot of money from it, and it was just to keep my hand in it. And I basically said, how about if I do it once a week? And they said, sure. And I said, okay. So that allowed me to kind of keep my hand in it, to play with the concept a little bit more, to bring my skills, because I was drawing in a very different way than I had before, in a much looser way. I was gradually sort of tightening it up in a way that I needed to be. But it gave me just a playground to play on, and it's always good to have a schedule. It forces you to do things. And then maybe about, 9-10 months into it, I sent out to one of the other syndicates that I'd been in touch with before and just said, hey, you want to just look at this? And they came back and they said, yeah, let's roll with this. So that was kind of that was the trajectory of what happened.
And you said that you went into college wanting to do graphic novels too. Where did that come from? Was your dad an artist at all, or did you get any art skills from him, or is that something that you kind of developed on your own?
Mostly, my parents weren't art people. So I always had an interest in it. My mom's brother, my uncle, was an artist, so he would help out in terms of a little bit of guidance to my parents. I took some private art lessons and such like that. I always wanted to be a cartoonist. I always wanted to have a comic strip from really the moment I can remember. Let's say 5 or 6, and wanting to do
then too as a kid.
Oh yeah, and that kind of got me into doing other kinds of art. And I initially went to college and became a graphic designer. My degree was in graphic design because I left cartooning behind for a while. And it wasn't until I got out of college and was doing some jobs here and there that needed some cartooning with them, that I started to get back into it. And there was, so I basically was working as a graphic designer, doing cartooning on the side, did a comic strip for a weekly newspaper for a number of years, sent out stuff for the syndicates. And then basically, as I was getting more and more tired of being a graphic designer, I'd been doing cartoon illustrations, started building my freelance work for that until I could get to a point where I could quit and do cartooning full time, which also included teaching. And at that time, as I am now, I'm an adjunct professor, but I was teaching specifically cartooning then. Now I teach some cartooning and primarily regular old drawing, but sometimes other things. I teach some film classes and such. So I basically built my freelance illustration business until I could quit and go full time. And then it was kind of after that I got the idea for Bonanas and put that into movement. When I didn't go back for my master's until many years after my my bachelor's degree, and was doing it at the same time we were having a kid, which was maybe not the smartest thing in terms of doing that. And also, I'm an older dad. I did not have my son until I was in my late 40s. So there's kind of a uniqueness to that, to kind of come into it that, with that much mileage, I guess.
Was the birth of the kid the inspiration to go back and get the master's, or were you going back to get the master's and then the coming of your firstborn happened?
Yeah, I've been looking into getting my master's for a couple of years with the thought of trying to teach full time. It's very difficult to teach full time, and it became more and more evident that I would probably need to have my terminal degree to teach college. For most college, for most subjects, instructors will have their doctorate. For art, it's really only your master's. With adjunct, usually there's some wiggle room, but more and more they want more and more paper degrees behind the people who are teaching. So that was my reasoning for that. And part of it was also because I thought I had left doing a comic strip behind, that I was going to use getting my degree to work on some longer form stuff, some graphic novel type stuff. And, I ended up going to a college where I actually kind of thrived and sort of opened up what I wanted to do, had a great time, met a lot of great people who are still my friends to this day. So yeah, that was happening. In parallel, but not because of having a kid.
So I'm curious, what is this process that you've been doing this, 5 years now, since 2018 with Daddy Daze? Is that right?
As a full-time, since syndication, I really started, yeah. I started sending it out close to 8 years ago. It started running online weekly probably about 7 years ago. So in terms of doing it daily, hard and fast schedule, it's been 5 years.
And what do you feel that maybe that process has taught you about fatherhood, or maybe vice versa? What has maybe fatherhood taught you about this process and the content that you're producing here? Have you found that there maybe are some parallels, or that maybe this reciprocal kind of learning that goes along with that at all? Or what's that experience been like for you?
That's a dang good question. One I'm trying to think of right now. I am not sure. Certainly. All right, let me make up some stuff. I mean, I'm not making up stuff, but uh, I think relating.
That's what we do best on this podcast.
I know. I know. Well,
right in line.
When you think about it, here we go. When you think about it, parenting is definitely, you have a set of what you think is, the right way or the wrong way, or things you want to teach your kids, or even just what you need to get done during the day. But there's a lot of flexibility with that. There's a lot of creativity with that. There's a lot of doing things on the fly. You don't know how your kids are going to be. You don't know how the day is going to be. And I think doing the strip, I'm not doing the same thing every day. Charles Schulz famously said, and I'm paraphrasing this because I can't remember exactly what he said, but doing a comic strip is where you have to do the same thing every day but not repeat yourself. And parenting can be a lot like that. Everything you're going to do with your kid is going to be a little bit different every day. Being an adult, you can think to yourself, well, wash my face, brush my teeth, all the things I need to do before I go to bed can be exactly the same because they can be exactly the same. With your kid, it can be a bit of however they are being at any one time. It can be, for the long. I mean, I still do this with my son. Before we go to bed, we more or less brush our teeth together, and there'll be a bit of, and it has been this forever. A little bit of, okay, make sure you're getting everything. Make sure you're doing it for enough time. And I know when he was younger, we would have little games we would play to make sure it's enough time, or when we're doing kind of the fluoride rinse, make sure you have it in. So it might be, humming a little song, or for a while, my kid's he's an artistic kid. He gets his artistic side from me. He gets his musical side from his mom. He's a very, very musical kid. And for a while, he was heavily into EDM, electronic dance music. And so he would watch these videos of these DJs. So we would pretend we were DJs, and we would just joke about how little a DJ is doing in terms of their performance, and that they're just pressing a button. So we would put, we just did this, I think, recently, because a lot of callbacks. He's a very funny kid. So we put our rinse in our mouths, and we're just, going slosh, slosh, slosh. And we'll both pretend like we're scratching, and we'll just hold it in our mouths, and then very obviously go to press a button, and then we'll start going whoosh, 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 and then, crazy dancing as if we are, inflatable guys at a used car lot, that you see out attracting attention on the road. So there's little games that you just do, even though you try to make them, you've got a schedule, you've got things that need to be accomplished, but there needs to be some creativity because there just needs to be. I was listening to one of your old podcasts, and something that is definitely something you brought up, and I can't remember which one of you brought it up, so my apologies, about being present with your kids. And I think it can be really easy to just be trying to get so much done that you're not being with your kids. I mean, I know you were just talking about your one kid talking to you, and you needed to listen, but this was actually from a couple of episodes before that. But that's really important, and that really means that you're not going to necessarily be able to get stuff done on a schedule that you want to. And I know for me personally, with the way I tend to work, which is a very loose schedule, that can definitely impact that, because I tend to not be very structured. I tend to work a lot. I tend not to be somebody who draws quickly or writes quickly. For as simple as my style is, you'd think, God, I'm surprised he isn't doing that while he's brushing his teeth. that it shouldn't take him any time at all, but somehow it all takes me a ton of time. So I find myself working a lot and at odd times, and that can mean that can get really impacted having a kid, and I need to be patient about that. So it's a tough thing.
Well, I really liked what you said there. I think that really goes hand in hand with what JJ and I talk a lot about here with neurodiverse kids too. My kid's got autism, and JJ is got ADHD, and we both have adult ADHD. So, a lot of neurodivergence going on here. And I think really like what the secret is to like navigating that with grace is just what you said. It's kind of like doing the same thing every day, but a little bit different. And with neurodiverse kids, the implementation of like routine and schedule is like vitally of the utmost importance, but also having the kind of impromptu improvisation or the ability to adapt, to be creative with that routine and not make it the same monotonous thing day after day, but to bring a little bit of spice and life to it and to change it so it still feels new and different, even though that it may be based in a structure or routine that helps us navigate the 4-letter word of responsibility throughout our day. So I really like that, man. I thought that was like a really cool kind of bring it home message and go hand in hand with what we talk about on the episodes here. And we've have another episode here where we're 47 minutes in and JJ hasn't said a word. I've done all the talking. He's just hiding out. He's hiding out in Cohen's room by the dinosaur sheets as Cohen is, I'm sure, running around making messes and throwing flour all up in the other room. So I hope that JJ at least enjoyed our conversation today as he hides out in his kid's room.
I tend to be a person who can talk a lot, having taught, having taught for years, you get used to just kind of yammering on, which I feel sometimes I do. So sorry about that.
I appreciate the idea of you mentioned callbacks in your relationship with your kids, and we talk about neurodivergence and predictability and stuff. And one thing that I think our kids find great comfort in is that presence, that bringing back something that occurred that was of connection between the two of you in some form. And even if the comic that you create is taking moments from real life, I imagine a lot of that is something that you share, more personally between the two of you, which is in itself a callback to a positive experience between the two of you, which creates that closer bond. So callbacks to me in real life with our kids, and like my kiddo who does want structure but also wants a little variability in his everyday life, really appreciates that awareness in his father that I am paying attention, even though right now, Colton says, I don't know exactly what he's doing in the other room, guys.
You're gonna find a mess out there, man. You're gonna go out there and you're gonna. I'll tell you this. These are the moments, man, where it's too quiet for too long that you go out there and you go, uh-oh.
Well,
John, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying. I was going to say the whole thing about being too quiet for too long. My son, his major music thing is that he's a drummer. So his activity is just making noise. So, if things are indeed quiet, then I do need to kind of ask what's going on, type of thing. And just very, very briefly,
it's kind of like a GPS. It's like an auditory GPS.
It is. And
you know
and
exactly what he's doing at all times. When it gets quiet is when you got to watch out.
One of the things that I wanted to mention, because I was talking about having to name the characters. I really didn't name the characters until we were heading into syndication. I didn't even want to name the characters because it was just, if the dad ever talked to his son in the strip, he would call him boy, which is what I also call my son sometimes. And where the name Angus came from was at that moment, like many, I guess he was maybe 7, about right? Yeah. Like many 7-year-olds, he was completely obsessed with AC/DC, which I'm just joking. Most 7-year-olds probably aren't. But at that point he was, and we were watching this one AC/DC DVD we had, this video video of a concert, because he really liked to watch musicians actually playing. And so we would watch it over and over again. So I named his character after Angus Young, the guitarist for AC/DC, because it was like, oh, okay, that's a kind of unique name.
Love it.
That would be fine. And mine, very briefly, mine came from actually when I was talking with my son's mom about the comic strip and what I was going to name the kid, and I wasn't really sure what to name my character and her character. She suggested, because Angus came from an interest my son had, she suggested, well, why don't you name yours after somebody that you look up to or whatever. And so I named mine after Paul Coker, who was one of the cartoonists from Mad Magazine, who I really loved. And I left it up to her to pick out a name for herself. So she picked out a bunch of them based on different people. So she picked out Amy, or one of them was Amy, and that's what I chose, who's named after Amy Beach, who was a pianist and composer, I think in the early 1900s. I don't have that right at the tip of my brain. And I think part of it was also picking to the names of the parents come up very infrequently. So it was picking two rather normal and rather boring names to in comparison with the baby's kind of unique name of Angus. Not really your usual baby name per se.
Well, yeah, what's next for Daddy Daze, or what's next for John? Or do you have any other things that you'd like to syndicate or develop, or what's the direction that you'd like to head after Daddy Daze is no longer a thing for you?
Well, I'm hoping Daddy Daze will continue to be a thing for me, to be honest. That's the weird thing about syndication, is that it is theoretically something that doesn't end. Most cartoonists don't necessarily, it goes two ways. Either you're successful enough and you've become successful enough that you can walk away from it if you want to. Bill Watterson did with Calvin and Hobbes. Gary Larson did with The Far Side. Or you just kind of continue it and try to do other things around it. Right now, it is building my readership. So, granted, newspapers are having a lot of trouble. So, trying to get it into more newspapers is tough. But I, do make a little bit of money if people go and see it online. So, if people want to check it out, it is at DaddyDazeComic. So it's DaddyDazE, let me start that again. DaddyDazeComic.com. And so part of it is just to build that audience. One of the things I'm working on right now, for hopefully within the next half a year or so, is a little bit more of a personal story that I'm going to run for a couple of weeks, which is about going when my dad died and going to his funeral. And some of the gags are directly things that my son said. They're kind of like the old version of this, where they are definitely right from life. But others of it are just kind of situations. We got caught in an awful snowstorm. We actually had to get a hotel room at 3 a.m., traveling up. And then I'm working on some other things, working on some things that have to do with teaching, working on some things. I'm working on a graphic novel, a whole bunch of things that it seems like I just don't have enough time for. And I'm trying to spend the summer structuring myself just a little bit better.
Well, thank you, John, for coming on and taking time out of that busy schedule to talk to us, man. I really enjoyed all the stuff that we touched on today and learning about your journey here.
Oh, thank you both.
And not to worry, guys, we'll have all the information and links to John's stuff in the show notes. We'll put the Daddy Daze link there and some links to his social media and stuff and where you can check out some of his comics. So thank you guys for listening to me and John babble. And if you're watching, you get to check out Cohen's cool dinosaur sheets. But once again, I'm CJ.
I'm JJ.
And this has been the ADHDads. We'll see you next week.